Hello, I'm Tara All and here with EA Zoom group with a meeting on Mars. And I am excited to talk about Mars for several reasons. One is that I've done talks before for EA Zoom meeting on choosing to live planets first, and I'm currently choosing to live Mars first. So it just seems that Mars has been rising to the surface for me. And maybe also just in the lives of people around me, I notice that there's a lot of potential for working with the part of ourselves that we liken to Mars. So I call it the marvelous masculine. And okay. So I wanted to first talk about, one second while I scoot this out of my way. Okay, before we talk about Mars specifically, I want to delve in a little bit to feminine and masculine principles. And there are varying takes on this, so these are mine, and I'm open to lots of discussion on this at the end, but it helps me to understand Mars and also Venus as our local masculine and local feminine when I put into context the bigger non-local feminine and masculine. So we'll spend a few minutes on this. And the non-local feminine, to me, is the body of what we call source. So whether we call that God or spirit or energy, that part is not of, doesn't matter so much to me, but the collective energy altogether, the body of it, we refer to as the non-local feminine. And this encompasses all the energy of the universe. But the body of source is not permanent. In fact, nothing about it is permanent. The body of source is the ever-changing. The feminine is always twirling and turning and curving and making form. And the feminine on its own would go crazy without the masculine because there would be nothing to ground it. There would be nothing to move away from or towards. There would be nothing. So I always think about the divine feminine or the non-local feminine truly as no thing, everything. And you could probably already hear that it has a very Neptunian nature to it. So in my mind, I envision the metal pole of sacred dance. And I envision that metal pole as the masculine. And it is the feminine that flows around the pole. We can even think back to times of Maypole and that dance. It's a very beautiful representation of the masculine and feminine. As the feminine moves around, she creates form with her body. And she moves far away, but she always comes back. And I think about it, even if she just touches that pole for a moment before she leaves again, she always comes back for that little touch. Sometimes seems like a tease if we're watching, a strip tease, but in my mind, I think of this more as the sacred form of dance. And the divine masculine, he holds the space with the permanence. So he is permanence, whereas the feminine is ever changing, the masculine is never changing. So she can dance free with him in the space of permanence or holding that. So her freedom, which means a lot to her, really means nothing without his existence. So he is the idea of life, right? We think about the divine masculine as consciousness, and consciousness is the potential of all ideas and thoughts before they turn into form. So he is the idea of life, and the idea is required, or like an epiphany. It's a prerequisite to manifestation. This is the whole idea that form does follow thought. So the non-local masculine, or the divine masculine, is unknowable, but also never changing. So the masculine is consciousness itself. It's thought unadulterated by creation. So truly, it's knowledge in its freest form. And without the feminine, this masculine mind has no life. There's no way to see it express through manifestation. It lives in the realm of potential. It is like the potency of life that never moves past potentiality into being, you know, and those of us who have a lot of idealistic signatures in our chart, you know, Uranus is representative of this. Libra certainly is idealistic. Pisces can be idealistic, but this whole idea of idealism is that we like holding the image or idea of something. Once we turn it into form or substance, you know, it's like, shoot, it now becomes something real. You know, it's like the potential, the ideal of a relationship, which is why I think many people love, you know, long distance relationships, because they can have this romantic fantasy, this metaphor or idealistic relationship. They don't have to deal with it. Here's the form of it and how that form changes. So this non-local masculine is never changing its consciousness. In mythology, Uranus is a perfect representative of non-local masculine. Uranus loved the idea of creating children. So he gets together with Mother Earth Gaia and they make babies. And when those babies were born, Uranus wanted nothing to do with them. You know, the actual product of his children paled in comparison to the idea or concept that he had of them. And we can think about this, you know, especially with our words and ideas, that once something goes into form, once we give it a definition, it does lose some of its power. In some senses, it's castrated. You know, and this is why oftentimes when I'm talking or teaching, I remind myself and those who I'm with that just by the mere act of giving it a word, or putting a word to it, we limit what it is. And, you know, words are how we communicate experience. As we know this, it doesn't have to truly be a limit, but we have to hold space in knowing that using the word or using the definition will never be the whole thing. So Uranus represents the liberation from form in radical truth. But here it is. If full liberation is being free of form, how can we actually know something if we don't make something with it? And a lot of this gets back to our dueling desires in our human nature, which is to, at the same time, return to source and move away from source. So Neptune is a representation of the non-local feminine. To me, more accurately, the ocean is representation of her. You know, the sea really has no master, so how can we really assign it to something? But Neptune is the closest that we can. And she does take Neptune, or Poseidon, the god, or his mind or consciousness, so that she can have the form of waves, sand, and creatures, or life manifest. And in astrology, Neptune stands for everything, which I liken to love. And while it represents the non-local feminine, it truly represents creation itself. So the divine masculine and feminine together are expressed in the rainbow of existence. You know, of everything that we know that exists comes through those. Okay, so the feminine longs for herself as the source of everything. So this is the part of us that wants to go back to where we come from. You know, wants to go back to source, go back into the womb, go back into the collective place. But, you know, if and when we feel our source and we sense we're touching the pole of constancy, we pull away again for our freedom. So again, this is this dance back and forth between truly, you know, kind of what we know and what we don't know, or form or formlessness. So we want Uranus and Neptune, or the masculine and feminine, simultaneously. We want to experience the consciousness of love through the Uranus function, and we want to have all the sensual, experiential nature of love through Neptune. And through both of them, we forever seek, you know, the other, and which is really they represent us, you know, but a greater collective consciousness of these two energies. So that being said, now we move into, okay, well, what's the and actually it should be the local masculine. So please make that correction in the slide, because we've now moved into the local masculine territory, which is Mars. Mars is where that masculine becomes manifest in us as humans, which we then call the local. So here he comes. He's got his sword, he has his honor, and what does he represent, or she if you prefer? I don't really attach masculine, feminine to male, female, but this is how we typically say it. So that's what kind of runs out of my mouth. But feel free to replace it with anything that works better for you. So what does he represent? So for me, when I think about planets and what they represent, I think about the symbol or the glyph, and I spend a little time even just feeling into the glyph. So if you imagine this circle with an arrow coming out of it, what comes to you? What does that symbol show or say? To me, it's being free at the end of the circle. It's the circle's moving, and there's a push out, a force for separation. So the part of us that is represented by Mars truly is the part that wants to break away and break free. It's the part that wants to separate from source. We want to distinguish ourselves as separate individual beings. That's the Mars function. And so it takes a lot of energy, Mars represents energy, to force ourselves out of that circle. You think about Mars ruling Aries, and Aries is the sign that represents the moment that we're born, but from Aries we come out of the Pisces womb, the collective womb, if you will, and that's a very comfortable, absorbed space. It takes energy to push us out of the ocean into this straightforward movement of energy. So there comes Mars, and it's the force of energy to move out of things. It's potency. Mars is how we want to conquer things. It's how we fight for things. It's our authentic desire, our sexual energy, our instinctual self. All the things that push us to say, I am taking action for myself. I am taking my own path. So I think of the glyph is breaking out of the flow, getting out of the flow. And this is why we think that, inherently this part of us, this is exactly what it's meant to do. But for those of us who are less comfortable with Martian energy, it comes across as very aggressive, very pointed, always picking a fight. There can be a harshness and a directness to it. But if you think about what it takes to get out of the circle or to break out of the flow of anything, think about a pattern in your own life where you really are stuck in something. It takes a lot to move us out of a groove that we've worn and become comfortable in. So Mars as an archetype is characterized by inconsistency and chaos. It's the absence of a pattern, or the moving out of a pattern. So there's a natural sense with Mars of unsteadiness. And certainly aggressiveness comes in the same territory. And Mars as an archetype also always needs a purpose. So intense focus on a goal. If you are having, or any of us are having issues with focusing on something, with moving forward with something, getting off the merry-go-round, moving out with assertion towards something. If we're having difficulty in those areas, oftentimes the chart is a wonderful diagnostic tool to help us find remedies for how to unblock our Mars so that Mars can actually move forward the way Mars wants to move forward. Mars that is thwarted does a lot of damage on the inside. I imagine, if that circle, if that outward arrow gets blocked, it is forced into the circle, you have all this potent cardinal fire energy, forced inside. So you can now apply that to all kinds of situations, and we can have some compassion for why we and those around us act in sometimes explosive ways. It's the energy gets stuck. So Mars, again, this outward moving energy, right? The feminine is the part of us that moves towards inclusivity. We want to bring things with the feminine nature into ourselves. Be one with things, find sameness with things. But the masculine archetype wants to separate and define by differences. So the Mars archetype, the masculine, has a very strong aversion towards being consumed. And you can imagine, right? So there's the part of us wanting to go back to source, which is ultimately being consumed into the feminine. The Mars is the absolute reaction to that. So when Mars is prominent by transit, progression, in a natal chart, whatever it is, that particular person oftentimes will be very sensitive to all of a sudden feeling like they don't have the freedom to move out, or they're being absorbed into something or someone else. They want to stand on their own 2 feet. Now, whether or not they're doing that is a different question, but there's the desire, right? Mars is the desire for this. Mars also represents instigation and fertilization. Mars initiates things, the part of us that gets things started and drops the seed of fertilization into things. It's not the part that brings longevity and that nurtures and grows something. It's the part that gives the initial burst of fertility, just like the seed in a field, right? It's the part that allows fertilization to happen, and then it's on to the next thing. There's a directness to Mars, and again, this force of separation, or which we oftentimes call individuation. Especially in evolutionary astrology, we talk about individuation, becoming an independent entity. So without the impetus to move away from what we've known or from what we're all connected with, there would be very little hope of establishing ourselves as an independent entity at all. So Mars and the Sun are the 2 planets, with the Sun being technically a luminary. These are the 2 that represent the masculine nature in us. And Mars is often referred to as the henchman of the Sun. We look at Mars as doing the Sun's bidding. And we can certainly look in charts to see how these 2 planets work together, to see whether that's a harmonious arrangement, or whether it's going to take some catalyzing to break apart and come back in new ways, such as with a square or an opposition. But ultimately, Mars is the muscles or legs of the Sun. Mars is our get up and go. So at its best, Mars is in service of the Sun, being super responsiveness without reactiveness, and assertiveness without violence. That's some of the ultimate potential of Mars, the ability to respond with courage, and to respond for the right fight and in the right timing, and in the right way and with honor. Mars is the part of us in combination with the Sun that's acting out our purpose. The Sun provides us our sense of purpose, and our sense of, we also liken the Sun to vitality, but this purpose, it needs a champion. So Mars is what fights for our sense of purpose. You can see also that if our Mars is off track, or we're out of touch with Mars, but yet we are identifying strongly with our solar sense of purpose, that can also be very frustrating, because we can have a very strong conscious knowing of what we feel that we're meant to be doing, but not have the energy or the strength or the stamina to go after it, because these 2 work together. More about Mars. So Mars is the pusher. Mars wants things to happen, move forward, go for it. And Mars generally doesn't like to be pushed in return. And one thing that can happen is when Mars retrograde, that can feel like a pusher against Mars. So Mars retrograde can be particularly uncomfortable for the Martian energy that wants to move forward. And this can then very much irritate Mars, or irritate us in general. And Mars is a planet that's very much associated with anger and irritability. So just something to keep in mind, that when you're dealing with a retrograde, you're dealing with it's different. Like we deal with retrogrades with the other inner planets as well that affect us. But because Mars is so strongly linked with our body and our energy, the retrograde can have a real strong effect on our physical beingness. And our physical beingness has a lot to do with what we're able to do in life, and I mean, like the energy, like the ability of our energy to like keep us going. It matters a lot. So Mars, to me, one of the fabulous things that Mars does as a function within us is this idea of separation, or imagine the sword cutting through things, eliminating things, moving forward. Mars can work within us to break things apart. Mars can work as a separator, outside and in our individuation, but also inside to separate, so that we can come back together in new ways. Because sometimes we become, too coagulated or I don't know, too congealed into something. And Mars says, oh, we need to do it differently. And so Mars has that strong power of the sword that also can cleanly cut through things. And I think about this whole idea of us breaking apart, coming back together, like truly, we are each the ultimate psychological and science experiment. And if we're paying attention, everything is reflected, within and without. So Mars also signifies breakers of tradition, our pioneer, this the people that came to new lands and pioneered new places. There's a lot of Martian energy, the courage to break forth into new places. Pathfinders, right? You're willing to break out. It takes that breaking out of the circle, because otherwise we're on the same route, right? Same route home every day. What brings you the same thing? You don't find the hidden coffee shop over here by going over here all the time. And that's just on a small scale. So from the standpoint of Mars, which represents our authentic desire, assertion, will, doing, right? Doing versus being. Venus is the being, receptive side of things. Mars is the active doing side of things. Some of the questions that come up with Mars, and so even when you're looking at where Mars is in your chart or what's happening with Mars, or if you want to touch base with yourself and say, hey, where am I at in the balance between my Venus and Mars, or my masculine and feminine? How am I embodying my masculine nature? These are some of the questions that the masculine nature asks, and most of the time, unconsciously, but it comes out in our behavior and what we're choosing. So the Martian masculine nature says, do I want it? Is it sexy enough? Is it fast enough? Is it dominant enough? Is it tough enough? Is it turning me on? With Mars, there's a level of wanting it to be exciting. Is it exciting me? Is it hard enough? Is it rough enough? Powerful enough? Assertive enough? Is there a fight in it? Like I said, Mars is looking for something to fight for. And if it doesn't have something healthy to channel that energy in, it's going to look all over the place for things or fight against. It's in its nature. And sometimes that's with people, in our lives, that we either attract other people to carry out that energy, or we project our own energy onto other people. So, let me take 1 second here. So these are questions, and in my personal life, living Mars first, these are the questions that I challenge myself with. If I'm choosing to live from the perspective of Mars, or standing in the spot of my chart where Mars is, these are the questions or things that are coming up for me. And it's interesting because sometimes I ask these questions and I recognize that I don't have the courage to answer them or go for them. And I'm starting to feel more and more how that stifles my own energy. Like it cuts off a part of me. And it can be easy, especially from the feminine side, those of us who have strong Venusian energy or Libra, that we want to find the compromise. We want to find the common ground. So we're always then looking to the other first. How will that person receive it, or how will that go over, or what will that do to my relationship? And that can be very difficult thing to break out of when we're trying to switch and work with Mars, because Mars can feel selfish. So if we're used to a different standpoint, it takes sometimes even negotiating with yourself to say, you know what I have deemed as selfish or direct or aggressive in the past, maybe I can reframe that, because there's a lot of power in owning who we are and being who we are, and Mars really helps us to do that. So Mars as the warrior. Mars does not want to sit still. Mars wants action, and generally he wants to move fast. That part in us wants to go, go, go. It's like we joke about Aries sometimes, that Aries thinks that it will be safe if it just runs or moves fast enough, like it avoids falling in the hole if it races past it. So speed can be a defense mechanism. But Mars wants action, and Mars is fiery in nature and wants to express his will. You know, the will being, what do I desire right now? And when he is immature, when that part within us is immature, it doesn't mean that we haven't developed it. You know, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It may just be latent, pushed under layers of other things. But when we haven't fully come into embodying that part of ourselves and learned mature ways to stand up for what we want, to ask for it, to get it, then oftentimes Mars will fight the wrong fights. And this is where we see conflict and aggression at work, at home, with neighbors, within our own body, because again, it's that energy in the circle that it has nowhere else to go. And sometimes, frankly, Mars just fights all the time. Sometimes the nature of Mars is like, it doesn't actually want to stop fighting, because I think there's a fear underneath with the masculine Martian energy that if it stops moving and fighting, it will no longer be alive. You know, it's like that life force will be consumed. We talked about the aversion to being consumed. That life force will be consumed, and then the existence, will cease to be. And what is Mars wanting more than anything? To have an individual existence. So you can see how, even without recognizing it, that particular energy is at play. So, it's interesting. We can see in charts sometimes, afflicted Mars gets stuck and doesn't do anything, and sometimes it just shoots energy everywhere without achieving anything, or it goes to destructive means. So the chart can help explain where Mars is likely to fight and how. We can look at Mars by sign and by house and by aspect, and we can get a good idea of where we're meant to put more energy and more effort, where we're really meant to individuate. So I think about, what would it mean for someone who has Mars in the 12th house? They're meant to somehow individuate, to separate, to stand on their own 2 feet, literally in the ocean of emotion, or like in the space of the most confusion, and the place of the ultimate feminine. So, like, that would not be necessarily easy for someone. But Mars shows where then you need to get your fire lit and move in that area. And that's just one example. You can use that example anywhere else in the chart as well. So here's the thing. Mars is going to fight regardless. So spending time working with Mars is really important, because the fighting is going to happen. But you can turn that into a whole different kind of fight. And this work is important because, again, Mars will burn up our energy. There's this very strong link with Mars and futility. And futility breeds a lot of anger. When we feel like we're not able to get somewhere or get through something or get out of something, that can be very frustrating. And Mars being directly linked to this, until we learn to channel energy for good, oftentimes we can find this happening, over and over and over again. And that's when this can lead to patterns of, depression and, all kinds of other things. So you can imagine, just like Aries in mythology, he doesn't always think first. It's like charging into things. It can be, trying to use brute force or just physical strength to power through things. Mars is associated with the will and willpower. So a strong Martian individual can sometimes believe they can will their way through anything. but there is a limit to what we can will ourselves through. So the balance here, is very important. Mars in particular, when this part of us feels threatened or is made to feel small, or even when we start to feel our own fear kicking in, these are examples of when oftentimes we act out. And how we act out, the weapons that we use, you can see that also very well in especially the sign that Mars is in. For example, Mars in Gemini very oftentimes will fight with words. Very strong with words, use words. Mars in Leo, for example, might decide, I'm not going to give you any more attention. With a child, I think about Mars in Leo like, I'm not going to play with you anymore. You're no longer in the special circle. The velvet rope no longer encompasses you. All right, so it's another example. Well, we could just take Mars in Aries, its own sign. How is it likely to fight? Sometimes with physical force, might punch someone in the face, but it also might run away. But there's a very, physical edge to Mars in Aries. So you can start to weave these pieces together and get a feel for kind of all the pieces of Mars that are happening all at once. And then you can kind of work them into a new alchemy for yourself. And then you can start to channel those things in positive directions. Because a Mars in Gemini that uses words as a weapon also has a lot of energy and vitality in their ability to communicate. So it's how you use it. Mars is also, rules the adrenals. And so the whole idea behind adrenaline, right? Sometimes with strong Mars or reflected Mars, it's like we're always in fight or flight mode. The adrenaline is constantly triggered. Let me take 1 second just to make sure. Okay, we're good. So, Mars the warrior, the last slide. We're probably all tired of hearing Mars being referred to as a warrior and how we fight, and it's true, but it's truly only a small piece. And like I was saying earlier, the reason why Mars is a warrior and wants to fight is because it takes a warrior's energy, to move out into life. It takes that, and I think it's important to appreciate that with Mars, to appreciate that Mars in some ways is the part that keeps us alive as a separate being. So give Mars something constructive to do. When Mars aligns with Spirit's will, energy flows with purposeful power. When you engage and embody Mars as your ally, serving your higher good, he is able to fight for love, peace, harmony, truth, freedom, all these beautiful things. And his true battle of purpose, whatever it may be, it shines. And Mars is not afraid to confront things. Certainly, fear can be triggered as well, but a healthy Mars will directly face something and take it, fight with honor. Mars is not the one to come around your back and stab you. Mars is to meet you eye to eye and say, let's get down to the bottom of whatever the thing is. So this heart of a warrior resides in the part of us that is Mars. And while Mars is very young in nature, just meaning that it's assertive, outgoing energy, Mars is very successful with internal work, because Mars is the part of us that's the courage to go deep into our heart. And this is where he can use his energy, his vitality, to bring consciousness to all the fears behind the fighting impulses. And then that brings this new balance and this new courage that comes from having faced ourselves, confronted, those fears within us. So he recognizes that the real battle, just like everything else in life, is within ourselves. And he develops strategies, right? So we could also liken Mars to strategic warfare. But these can be positive strategies to overcome challenges internally and externally. In my mind, Mars is what helps us get where we're going. So, how to bring harmony to your masculine nature. I love the book The Inner Planets by Liz Green and Howard Sesfortis, and I use it and quote it many times in my teaching. And there's a quote from that book that says, "Without Mars, we are impotent, and someone else's Mars will beat us up." And it's true. Our Mars does not have to be Aryan nature. Our Mars can be in Libra and be an entirely different version of Mars. But until we are willing to stand on our own 2 feet and stand up for ourselves, to speak up for what we want, to go after what we want, and to be able to apply our energy in healthy ways towards real purpose, we will be beaten down in life. And we do that to ourselves, and then we attract others to do that to us as well. So there's just such hope in tapping into the potency of Mars. And so I talked about this before, but you can look at this by sign, by house, by aspect, in a more real-time mode by transit and progression, where Mars really shows where we need to put energy, where we've chosen to need to give that extra boost. Mars is like an extra power pack, an extra energy boost, where we need to take our will and drive and really go towards something, to choose something and focus. It makes me think back again to Mars in the 12th house, right? How easy is it to focus in the 12th house? Freaking difficult. So that takes a strong Mars to be able to say, I'm going to pick something out of everything and find a path and pursue it. 12th house by nature doesn't want to choose a path. So Mars in the chart. The house that Mars is in the natal chart specifically shows the area of life where we're most likely to pursue our objectives and where we try to impress others with our sexiness, honor, and power. So, play around with this one for yourself. But the house, I think about the houses as classrooms in life or areas where we are living out our consciousness, right? So where Mars is where we're going to want to have our sense of purpose in achieving objectives is going to sit in there oftentimes. So oftentimes you'll see a lot of energy happening in that house, and activities represented by the house. Whether or not the energy is meaningful is a different conversation. But whether it's inside, outside, chaotic, organized, there's a lot going on there. And it's important to recognize that even if you don't see it externally manifesting. I know a lot of people will say, well, I'm not doing anything. I don't have any life. I just stay home all day. Well, that's one way to look at it. But life is always happening. And if you're home all day, I'd be willing to bet a lot that things inside are accentuated and accelerated. So just to think about, energy runs all different ways. So I'm going to try to go through the rest, which I hope is not a lot, just in the next 5 minutes so we have time to talk, because I'm actually excited to talk with you guys about this. So Mars in the chart, what does it represent? Our energy patterns. You can learn a lot about your own energy by looking at Mars. It's also where we want to be number one. So this area, wherever Mars is, if we start to feel like we're getting pushed down the totem pole, or we're not being recognized, that can really trigger our Martian reactions. It also represents our sexual energy. It's not necessarily our lovemaking style. Venus has a lot to do with that. But our sexual energy itself and how we want to express it through acts or action. Also think about sexual energy in a sense, like, does it come in short bursts? Is it long endurance? Is it scattered? Is it focused? These are examples of what I mean by sexual energy. It's also the sexual acts, I don't know, take Mars in Leo, might like to dress up, some of these things. I think about Mars as how we give it versus how we take it. And you can apply that to sex or all different kinds of situations. But Venus to me represents more of how we take it, and Mars is more of how we give it. And those aren't always the same, which can cause confusion. And that little piece itself is worth introspection and self-discovery. Also, Mars in general represents activity and anger and irritability. And I once read on the cover of a book that irritability is anger forced through a small hole. And I like that. And I give a couple examples of how irritability with Mars can surface. So a Mars in Sagittarius might be very irritated because they believe they know the larger truth. They have the wisdom. but it's really not worth explaining it to anyone because other people just don't get it and they just drag them down with negativity, right? Taurus, an example of Mars in Taurus could be, I have to provide all the resources and I can't rely on anybody else. Pisces could be, I have to ease the suffering of all beings and no one has compassion for me. So these, you can continue down with the others. A blocked Mars can lead to feelings of impotence, anger, violence, and victimization. Emotionally linked symptoms, so things that erupt. Think about like colitis in the intestinal system. You know, colitis is a very simplified way to describe it, but it is like a rash inside the colon. And all types of red boils, acne, cysts, rashes, things that erupt also can be infections. Many times are linked to blocked Mars. Rage turned inward attacks the body. Chronic depression, and this one, you know, I found to be very true with myself and people in my life, that blocked Mars oftentimes results in passive-aggressive expression of anger. In the most severe form, this can be passive forms of suicide. In less severe forms, it can be just dragging your heels, you know, falling down, forgetting to do things. You know, these are some of the things that can happen because remember, Mars has a lot to do with the physical body. So it's not surprising that blocked Mars, we can see it and feel it through our body. So paying attention to our bodies is important. Mars in relationships. If you're coming from a Martian orientation, you're likely to attract a Venusian partner, and vice versa. If you come from a Venusian orientation, you're likely to attract a Martian partner. And if you want to play around with this, because ultimately what we're all trying to do is balance and have the intermarriage union between our own inner masculine and feminine, right? And that's what Mars and Venus represent. And we know that we tend to attract the parts that we're not owning and play them out through others. But others also can just show us the mirror of what that looks like and what that is and how to integrate it. So if you want to play around with this, you know, you can imagine a bar scene or how you go into a room. But, you know, I think a bar scene is a good one because a good phrase with Mars is what's your game and how do you bring your game? Not how you receive someone else's game necessarily, but how do you bring it, you know, or do you bring it? And if you're not bringing it at all in any fashion, you know, that's a good sign that there might be something blocked within there. Remember, Mars doesn't always have to look, you know, overly aggressive, but Mars does take action. A healthy Mars is doing something on behalf of itself. Last slide. It's funny because as I was preparing this presentation, I opened up my email and I had two emails. One was from Soulsign Astrology, which is Adam Gainsburg's gig, and he tells us that next week, or actually this week he says that next week Mars will become visible in the pre-dawn sky, and that coming up here, Mars will be the brightest since 2003. And then HP sends a mass email that says, get ready for the red planet. You know, we're on a mission. And they liken themselves with extreme power and expandability of Mars. And just makes me think that for whatever reason right now, you know, with me and with sharing this, that there's an importance to Mars. There's an importance to us remembering that what we desire and how we serve our own purpose is important. And maybe it's come to a point in society and in our personal lives where it's not enough to idealize it and talk about it and have meetings about it and hope that it will happen differently, but that we actually need to stand up and give legs to what it is we believe in. So that's my spiel. I'm going to stop the share and then let's go to questions because I know there are. And I didn't fully read the chat, so whoever wants to talk, if you would just jump in, that would be awesome.
Okay, go ahead, Brooke.
Brooke, are you there?
Hey there.
Can you hear me?
I don't know if you can. I can. Can you see me? I don't know if that matters.
I can see you, and I can see your chart. It's perfect combination.
And you can hear me, okay? Yeah, it's so hard to see on my device. Oddly enough, I'm in the locker room, and it's hard. And I'm on an iPod, so it's hard to see. But more or less, I was just wondering. And thank you again for doing this. This is really cool because I have a lot of like kind of Martian stuff going on, but also feminine stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like relationships and even what you do as work are very really the self versus the other thing, because I'm very individualistic, but very powerfully drawn to relationships, and especially helping people. I actually work in like the kind of a crisis, like trauma, like halfway house type thing, so I'm like really kind of supporting being with people all the time. But anyway, I was just wondering, it's more or less it's tough, because I really want to, in my life and in relationships and in work, be really individual and really do exactly what I want, but also like I'm really like almost feel really pulled into like that service to kind of mentality too, and that's kind of a struggle. And I think like I don't know if my sun moon thing kind of indicates some of that.
Do they?
But anyway, I just want to see.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you, as I hear you want to do your individual thing, but being a service is important, and what I hear underneath this surface, I guess, is that they don't have to be separate. Like maybe doing your individual thing absolutely is service. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think you might be muted. Unmute yourself.
I was just saying, I know they're not mutually exclusive, and I actually think like having this kind of placement can be really powerful, because I kind of like can see both ends of it, but it's still like hard kind of swinging between the two, where I'm like, I want everyone to like totally go away and I'll do my own thing, or like I'll or like immerse myself in helping, which is like super fulfilling feeling also. But you know what I mean, just kind of being pulled in different directions. I guess that applies to like relationships and work, because it's similar, So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, clearly your chart has a big emphasis on work. I mean, and your Saturn and Capricorn energy is, the Dharma is very strong there, but it is clearly, right? So it's interesting to me though that then we have. So here's the thing. So you have this Mars in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury in Aries. Like you're right, there's a lot of independence there. And I think a lot of this comes down to, you speaking from your own instinctual wisdom. I see, when I think about Mercury in Aries, it is speaking as a pioneer.
I can't hear you. I don't know.
Linda, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I can. Are you clear on Brooke's question?
Yeah, my understanding of, she was talking about the balance between doing her own thing and working in service. And one thing that I was sharing is that I don't think they have to be separate. I think that absolutely you can be doing your own thing, and doing your own thing can be of service. Sometimes I think it's shifting the perspective that when you break off and do your separate thing, that now you're no longer of service. I think one thing that Mars teaches us is that in some ways we are of greatest service by separating and doing our thing, and then allowing that to be seen and sharing it and bringing it back to the collective.
Yeah, I think that, I think like at my highest expression of myself, like doing my own thing could be a service, but I feel like like I'll it's really odd, like simultaneously having conflicting feelings all the time. Like I want to be alone, or I want I want to be around people, and it's fascinating. But anyway, I don't know. Anything else specifically?
Are there? Yeah. Well, just I think for some reason that the ruler of Mars seems important to me in your chart. And with that Aries, I wonder, like, are you having opportunities where you can truly share and communicate? I don't know, like if it's, new ideas, new ways of doing things, where you're able to just sort of instinctually express who you are, without the refined edge.
I mean that's changed over time. I mean, I'm pretty, I don't really think, you can say I go with a filter. That's kind of true. I am, I try to be careful depending on the context, but I'm like, I can be pretty coarse, be like straightforward, but like respectful, because I'm also really sensitive to how people feel, but I'm also, yeah, I don't have a problem expressing myself. I guess it's more like, I can be all over the place, and like trying to figure out how to like channel that energy is hard, because I have a lot of it. Like, I have to like run all the time, or I feel like really not,
Yeah.
But anyway, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I think.
I think the best thing, without having more time, the best thing that I can offer you is that spend some time thinking or meditating or feeling into your Mercury in Aries, because Aries represents streaming consciousness. It's like communicating things in real time. And there's something about that. And it could even be something that you use in service, of others. But I think it would, somehow I feel like it would help integrate things. And I don't have something better to tell you right now at this amount of time, but it feels worth mentioning. So I just want you to be aware.
No, I understand. I know this is meant to be brief, so I'm sorry, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, go ahead, Diana. Unmute yourself.
Diana, are you there?
Hey, hi. Yeah.
Hi, Diana.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. I just kind of looking to hear your take on my busy Mars.
You're busy, Mars?
Yeah.
Well, tell me how it's busy.
Actually, I don't quite relate to my Mars, and that's why I'm interested on hearing your take, because when I look at the 4th house and Aquarius, I can't really relate it to the home, the father, the mother. So I'm just, it is making a square to Pluto and my sun and Jupiter. So that's probably what brings everything in. But
well, to me, all those planets aspecting Mars mean that there's a lot of transformation or like growth available with Mars, right? So when we see a lot of aspects with a close personal planet like that means that there's like I would say like new truths, new ways of relating and engaging with the energy. So it doesn't surprise me that you would say you don't relate to it. Those planets are all trying to get you sort of to transform it and use it and relate to it in a different way. If you just back off the 4th house and let's just go with Mars and Aquarius. That's interesting energy, right? Because Mars, Mars is fire energy, wants to move straight forward. And Aquarius is, remember how we talked earlier, I talked about how we can get stuck in the ideal, the idealism of something and not move forward with things. Well, Mars wants to move forward, but Aquarius can be very idealistic. Like it wouldn't be surprising to me with a Mars and Aquarius if you would spend a lot of time in your head, like you might relate more to your Martian energy in an intellectual way. I don't know how it is for you, you know.
Yeah. See, I don't relate to it. I don't relate to it because I experience more of the earthy, stable. Maybe that's because Uranus, the ruler, is in.
Yeah, but I think the earthy stableness you're getting from all your stuff
from my sun,
from Taurus.
Yeah, that's where I was, but then I'm like, maybe Uranus in Capricorn. Well, that's actually the conditioning from it all, but yeah, it's so hard for me to relate to my Mars in Aquarius.
But here's the thing, but like if we take the Aquarius. Thank you. You know, like Taurus is like, no, thank you. I'm, you know, I like things stable and dependable, and I like things to be, you know, tangible that I can have them, right? Taurus is all feminine energy. So I think part of this is, you know, for you, your masculine is needing to find its own legs. So like,
it has 4 legs.
where are the 4 legs? Like, I guess like it's
I think it's the like, Pluto. I think it's the Pluto conjunct the ascendant squaring Mars. It's very masculine energy. So I think actually my sun being in Taurus kind of softens that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would say anything in the 4th house, because the 4th house to me, I mean, yes, it is all the things you mentioned, but the 4th house is also our psychological foundation. And you have Mars at the root of your chart, which means your masculine energy in this lifetime, it's a huge part of who you are and what you're made up of. For you, it's just about figuring out what means. And I think the 4th house to me, in this context, less than speaking to, you know, family and nurturing, it more speaks to you diving into your own psychological nature to figure out what the masculine means to you and how it is in there, you know. And the 4th house is a watery house, right? You know, it's not necessary, and it's deep and dark, you know. It's like you've got to sort of break out of your circle and be willing to feel around in the darker parts of yourself to find where it is. And that can be exciting or it can be scary, whichever approach you want to take. But once you do it, I mean, that's the anchor of your chart. Once you do that work, Mars becomes your ballast. You know, Mars becomes your anchor.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And Diana, you have Pallas Athena sitting.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, she's the champion.
Yeah,
she champions things.
Huh. Yeah, I think the Pluto conjunct the ascendant. I think the masculine is something that it's innate to me, like which relates to the foundation 4th house energy, you know, like fundamental, like roots. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about Pallas being right next to Mars for extra info, but
yeah, no, I think absolutely, because to me, wherever Pallas is, that's you know what we want and need to champion. I look at it that way. Like, so it's funny, like you've got your female champion or warrior linked arms with your masculine, you know. It's like they're like, they want to do this. And the 4th house also, the 4th house is the identity that you form for yourself. You know, it's how you know, we think about the 1st, 2nd, 3rd house is like, you know, we're born and then we have a body and we have senses and feelings in our mind. And the 4th house is where it all comes together into identity. So part of this is really you deciding, you know, who you want to be. And I don't mean that in like a weird esoteric way, but I mean, that's like, you in some respects, like you come with some of the things you're made up with, but part of this is you getting outside of the box and maybe deciding, hey, you know what, this is who I really am, which I think it's exciting work. You've got all the champions there to say, focus on you, right? 4th house is you.
Okay. Yeah, that's innate for me to focus on me too. But yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, Tara, we have one more chart. I'll just grab it. I'll just need a minute. So go ahead, Carly.
Hi, Tara.
Hello.
I just had just a quick question.
Okay.
wondering if you've seen this before or just how you see this playing out. I've got Mars exactly conjunct my Jupiter, like to the hour, in 2 degrees of Scorpio. But yeah, I think it's probably quite an interesting part of my chart that I don't know a lot about. So I was just wondering if you've really seen that before or what your take is.
Well, my take is that, Jupiter's always trying to expand something, right? Whatever Jupiter touches is making it bigger. I think Jupiter is shining a flashlight on something, but Jupiter also brings an optimism, a levity to something. And then I would say in some respects and I don't know without talking about the rest of your chart, that for some reason, that part of you, the part of you that authentically desires things, that goes after what you want, that asks for what you want, that your own life force, your will, somehow it needs to be bigger and stronger. And also Jupiter also asks us to expand our consciousness around something. So like, to me, there could be work in there for you of discovering the true wisdom or an expanded truth, a new truth around what that masculine means. Now you could, think about it. Jupiter represents wisdom. You could tap into that part of yourself and have some new way of teaching or sharing some new insight into the whole masculine nature. Jupiter, it offers all kinds of opportunities. On the downside, it could amp something up so much that we could never sleep at night. So both ways.
Yep, I experience it both ways too.
And it's in the 6th house, right? So we could take this lots of ways. This could be tremendous healing potential, tremendous capacity to be of service. But it's for sure a strong signature. And they're both, we take, thinking about Jupiter is ruling Sagittarius, so that adds more fire. So there's just this huge abundance of fire in the 6th house. And 6th house, it's really where we want to be of service, to be useful, but it's also self-improvement. And it's also the physical body. And so I always wonder when those of us who have these signature where there's strong, potent energy in body houses, like, it makes me wonder, in past lives, did we not take care of our bodies? Did we not self-nurture enough? Did we not, what is it about that part of our physical selves that needs to be, powered up, if you will? Something to play around with.
Yep, spot on. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah. Oh,
Tara, I had a quick comment on the first time I've ever heard of this Mars being the henchman of the sun. I kind of like that, especially since I have Sun conjunct Mars.
Wow, look at you, perfect.
In Aries, so I'm going to have to investigate that some more.
Well, what I love about that, and I'm sure I stole that from Liz Green and Howard Sassport, is they have just clever stuff in there, and over time, I forget kind of what I pulled from there. But what I love about you having those archetypes together, especially in the sign of Aries, is, when we have a repeating archetype, there's no question we really wanted to embody it. It's sort of like I have a natural wheel around my chart, and I think, wow, well, in past lives, I really must have not gotten it. Now I had to double down, and so when that happens, there's just such tremendous opportunity for you to really radiate that Aryan Martian energy out in the world, maybe more so than others. And so it's worth it, it's worth getting in there.
Yeah, I'm also a first house Pluto, so it seems like a just huge Aries. You're going to do Aries whether you want to or not.
Yeah, but there's so many ways to do it. Think about the potency and the power that's available through that. Some people, for example, they're in this lifetime and they will never have an ounce of that energy or power. Theirs will be in different ways, but all that stuff, and Pluto in your first house, how you could run energy through your body, how you could heal with energy, work with life force. I don't know. I think that energy, that's exciting to me. Independence
is a huge huge thing for me, and that's something that I really want to teach others, especially women, because we're kind of taught to, be this passive thing, and that just like, so
I agree.
Made that my goal.
Yes, my Aries rising Mars ruled chart agrees with you completely. We can teach workshops together. Thank you, Wanda.
Tara, I have a little different twist on it that I would like to have you speak a little bit about Mars and Scorpio.
Okay.
My Mars and Scorpio has a lot of aspects and a lot of stuff, and I just had a progressed new moon on it. But you talk about Mars being aggressive and masculine and yang, and Scorpio is introverted somewhat and feminine and yin. Yeah. So could you speak a little?
I think it's like taking the active principle and then in many ways going deep and taking it on the inside. Like when I think about a Mars in Scorpio, I think about the will and the energy to penetrate, into darker areas, into our shadow, right? Into those places. So that Mars absolutely is going to have a different feel, but Mars always has action to it. Like for example, a Venus in Scorpio would be receiving energy that way, but a Mars in Scorpio on some level is going to initiate action in that way, even if it's inward initiation. It's like we think about energies this way a lot, like Cancer is an example of cardinal water. Yeah, but it's initiating things, but where? Oftentimes the feeling's on the inside. And I think about a Mars in Scorpio, different, but in some ways a similar signature of it's this needing to have the courage and the energy to go into the deeper, darker spaces. And truly, to me, Scorpio is intimacy. So it's also taking action to find intimacy, and that can be with self and with others. So there's going to be a combination for sure, but I don't know if that makes sense to you, that there, in my mind with Mars, there's an active nature of wanting to make those things happen. Now, Mars in a yin sign, is it going to be less likely to maybe go for it? Yes, and that's when we deal with more of the side of blocked Mars, because by nature that Mars is not going to be as comfortable. And Mars in Scorpio, my goodness, it doesn't want to be vulnerable. So if it's forever trying to build a force field around itself, maybe that's where all its action goes. All this action goes to, I'm going to make sure that no one will penetrate me. But then at the same time, what it really wants is that level of intimacy. Does that make sense, Sue? What else would you ask or say about that?
No, absolutely, yes. And it does feel to me a little bit more internal. It does feel a little bit more not wanting to be exposed. And putting up the field to prevent that, but it also does feel like going a lot deeper, and wanting to go deeply. I also have Pallas conjunct Mars, and so I tend to want to go really deep into whatever I'm going into.
Yeah, and that gives you focus. By the way, your potential for focus with that, super powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
And to help others, to help others to find the focus.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks a lot.
Tara, what do you think of physical problems associated with Mars, like, for example, headaches and fevers, things like that?
Yeah, I think anything that spikes up definitely can be related to Mars. I know, I have Mars rules my chart, and I do have a lot of irritable things, like rashes or upset stomach or, all of a sudden something's inflamed, or now I feel hot. You know, I think those kind of rushes or reactions definitely can be associated with Mars. Mars also, remember, ruling the adrenals can have a lot to do with adrenal insufficiency and adrenal fatigue. You know, so we get that as well with Mars issues. And I think about just vitality in general. So with Mars, I mean, I think more so than some of the other planets, it can manifest in lots of things. But I for sure think that things that erupt and flame up, those to me, that's a really good barometer with yourself, you know, when those kinds of things happen.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions, comments?
I have one more comment that kind of piggybacks on what you were saying, Linda. I broke my leg when Saturn was exactly conjunct transiting my Mars. So that was a physical manifestation, and I believe of not being on my path.
Yeah. I think that those types of things, and especially with the Saturn combined, but Mars, sometimes we sabotage our own vitality when we know we're not, on some level, even unconsciously, when we know we're not, you know, we can call it path or purpose, whatever you like to call it, but whenever we know we're not living in our truth, like we're not living true to our own nature, because Mars is instinctual, right? So when I'm not living true to my own nature, and even if that means that I'm not sharing something honestly right now, that gets stuffed somewhere, right? That gets stuffed somewhere. And at some level, you know, anger builds, and that may be mostly self-inflicted anger, but I think oftentimes it comes out in us sabotaging our own vitality, which is sickness, headaches, falling down, you know, like I said, all the way down to the more devastating things. But it's like on some level, we know we're not living how we're meant to live. And so some part of us, and maybe this is in a self-punishing way, says, well, then we have to do something different. And so, you know, I've had these instances, you fall down, you can't do anything, you can't move for a while, and boy, no, it shifts your perspective. I don't, you know, we don't wish that on any of us, that things get that severe. I mean, it is my belief that by the time something comes out in the body, it's been through all of the other places it's tried to be, you know, it's trying to be seen everywhere else. So we know when we're breaking our leg, you know, from that standpoint, because sometimes just accidents happen, right? But seriously, when we're having a seriously physical issue, that means that mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you know, it's tried to get through every way. So, yeah. I guess there's a reality to Mars, you know, because it hits home, because it hits in our flesh and blood.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. It will come out somewhere.
Getting tired, Tara?
I'm just thinking about all my own, like all my irritability, like, you know, I have irritable bowel, I have irritable this, I have irritable nature. And it's all, I mean, like, we can laugh, but it's also perfect. It's perfectly teaching me. I don't enjoy it, but the more irritable I become in my body or my bowel or my brain or my conversation, like the more I know my Mars, you know, the part of me represented by Mars needs attention. So
I thought irritability was more Virgo.
Well, it probably can be both, right?
Yeah.
But to me, irritability ultimately is a form of anger, and to me, anger links to Mars.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I would not negate the Virgo side at all. I think we could probably make an equal cause.
Okay, guys, this is your last chance. Any final questions?
Quickly, Tara's just wondering where your Mars is in your chart, seeing as you said Mars ruled.
Yeah, it's conjunct the moon in Leo in the 5th house.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Cool. Fun.
So much fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you so much, Tara. That was absolutely amazing.
Thank you, everybody. It was very fun.
Okay, so would you all please thank Tara all?
Brilliant, thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
My pleasure.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.